Paint It Black, Jagger and Richards confirmed the talent displayed in earlier compositions. Not since Satisfaction had a Stones track had so much impact, and by moving away from their blues roots, the band proved that they could conquer new musical territory.
I think it's one of those happy accidents, you know. I mean, when they went in to record that song, they had no conception of how it was going to come out. And again, it's a record where you hear Brian Jones at his very, very best, because there are all sorts of little touches in there, the sitar and so on, that you know, are pure Brian Jones, and it's an example of how important he was. Even, you know, we're now into 1966, and they're no longer an R&B band. They've moved on from there, but Brian Jones still had a significant part to play.
Brian Jones' role within the band has long been hotly debated. How important was he to the Stones? What did he bring to the table? And of course, when you had a strong or growing writing team like Mick and Keith, they formed a close bond and began to write more and more songs, which became more important with the latter albums. So you wondered what was Brian's role within the band, and I think that was to introduce new sounds, new instruments, new effects, not just rely on the heavy blues guitar riffing or chordal backing. For example, on Paint It Black, it's Brian that plays the sitar. And when you saw the videos, or you saw the Stones live on TV, say at Ready, Steady, Go, you tend to find Brian sitting down and playing some bizarre new instruments. So he was the man who was experimenting. He'd started the group, and he was the one that was prepared to push it forward tonally. So he always had a role, an important role, even if he began to feel a little bit left out of what the Stones were doing.
When Paint It Black and all that stuff came out, I think that what I liked about it was the fact that it was like a translation of what we had originally started off doing, but it kind of just took it ahead, you know, which is kind of what I think we were all aiming to do at that time.
You know, by this stage they're on a roll, and there is a classic Rolling Stones sound, and it's there in the grooves.
1966 would become a landmark year in the history of popular music. With a growing youth culture, which would soon stage its own social revolution, came a new direction and ambition from popular artists. Along with the Beatles' Revolver and Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, Paint It Black and the album Aftermath placed the Stones once more at the forefront of musical innovation. The band toured relentlessly for the rest of the year, first in North America and then in Britain. Their final release in 1966 was a new single, Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadow?
Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadows was quite frantic in a way. I think it was quite a rushed performance. Mick Jagger was pushing out the lyrics as fast as he could, and Charlie Watts was pounding away, trying to support him. It wasn't such a big hit for the Stones. It didn't do quite so well in the charts. So Maybe, I mean, obviously when a band is churning out records, you know, who knows whether this was just a particular track that was at the end of a session and they weren't feeling so inspired on that particular day. You can never be sure, but in looking in the context of their release schedule, it was like a little bit of a step backwards for them. It wasn't so confident. It didn't seem to have the edge and the kind of authority of their previous singles. It was good, it was memorable, people love it still, but it wasn't quite vintage Stones.
Story about how you adore me, live in the shadow.
Have you seen your mother smacked of desperation because I think the pressure they were under sort of to produce a new single every 2 or 3 months? For example, I mean, it had trumpets on it, which would kind of echo the fact that the Beatles had just used a horn section on Got to Get You Into My Life on Revolver. I don't think it was a particularly strong song under the production. I mean, you know, the impact was fairly strong when you heard it on the radio, just one big noise. But when you actually, you know, I think the acid test of a good song is whether it can be reduced to just voice and piano or voice and guitar. And I don't think Have You Seen Your Mother stood up to that. I think, you know, the lyrics were poor. They were just words to sing, really. You know, just to sort of fill up, well, just to fill up the syllables to make the verses scan. And it failed very badly to get to #1. And I think, you know, that was a bit of a trough as far as the Stones' sort of creativity was concerned.
While the Stones would continue to experiment with musical forms over the following few years, this early period of their music, while they were honing their craft, still resonates today. Unaffected during this time by the horror of Altamont, the drugs busts and Brian Jones' tragic death, the Stones were pioneers in their field, and the music that they created remains monolithic within the history of rock and roll.
There's definitely a fondness for that early period of the Stones. I think they achieved an awful lot in their first 5 years together, a lot that was important. And even if their first 2 albums were mostly covers, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because as far as the public were concerned, all those songs, those R&B hits, and blues tunes, it was all fresh and new anyway, so that was all part of the great discovery.